Hello, here in front of me is a Surface Pro on the left, 2017, and on the right is a Galaxy Book Flex. I have decided to move on now from the Surface Pros and move on to a Galaxy Flex. I'll explain the reasons why and I'll give you some demonstrations. Firstly, I'll just list a couple of the improvements on the Flex. Now what I like to do is I like to do my art outside. So one important aspect is the battery life, and the Flex has significantly better battery life. Probably conservatively, probably 50% better, but that is conservative. It's probably between 50% and 100%, I would say. Better battery life, which wasn't always an issue for me with the Surface Pro, because I'll just plug in a battery pack and that'll be fine. So that wasn't really too much of an issue, but it's a nice to have for it anyway. The next issue is that I get a bit more screen real estate. Again, not too much of an improvement. Probably get about an extra inch of real estate for my art, as you can probably see in comparison to the one on the left and the one on the right. Although if I just make this one more equivalent, you can probably just see that I get a bit more canvas size there to work with. But again, that's not a big deal. Like once you actually use it, it's something you get used to. If you were moving from the Flex to the Surface Pro, you would easily get used to the 1 inch less. So these are, like I said, these are only minor improvements that I'm describing. The next one is, because I work outside, or I like to sit outside, I like to have a nice bright display. And as you can see, both screens are pretty much equivalent. I just did a test outside because at the moment we have a lot of sun, and on its default settings, the Flex is slightly brighter, but not by too much. And you can clearly see the contrast of the colours coming through a bit better. So therefore you can have a better judge of what you're working on. However, Flex has a little trick that you can do, whereas you can actually ramp the brightness up because it has an outdoor mode. So if you press Function and then Brightness, it ramps the brightness up, which makes it significantly brighter than the Surface Pro and works really well outside. So that is probably a bit more than a minor improvement regarding it. The other improvement is regarding the kickstand and the laptop form factor. I really love the kickstand initially because it was well made on the Surface device. But after using it for a period of years, it was starting to get a bit more and more uncomfortable if I was using it on my lap, for example. Now, for an artist, it'll be fine because you'll just flip it over and then you'll just use it as a tablet. So that's absolutely fine. And of course, the Flex would do something equivalent, presumably based upon its name. And you can just fold that one around as so. But I think overall, again, it's a very slight improvement. I think I prefer the laptop form factor now. And also, talking of form factor, you can see that they are both very similar. Of course, the CPU and everything else is housed in the actual body and the keyboard, as with this one it's in the tablet itself, so the tablet bit's going to be a bit more chunky anyway, but when you fold it over, they are pretty much identical. The other improvement, as you can see, are the bezels, which gives you pretty much that extra inch of screen size, hence canvas size. I wasn't really too bothered about the Surface Pro because, of course, when you're picking it up, you kind of need to have a bit of thumb space so that you can grab it, and especially with the Surface Pro. However, with this, I don't typically use it flat anyway, so the way I'll be holding it was just to have my hand around at the back, so I wasn't actually having my thumb on any of the bezels, which, due to the way the Surface Pro is designed, it just felt a bit more difficult to do that, really. Okay, so that's a whole few minor things regarding it. So they're not really deal breakers. I could have quite happily carried on using my Surface Pro. Another improvement is the pen that comes with it. The pen on the Flex is built in to the laptop, and of course it's pretty much a phone pen, so it's very thin and fiddly, which actually, once you use it for a bit, it doesn't really feel too bad. And it comes with no battery, so you're not going to have any issues regarding that. However, I do have another Samsung pen, which is the one that I use on my Galaxy S4, and that works a lot better. I'll probably work out how to attach it to this, possibly. What I've used in the past is a pen loop, as we can see on here on my Surface Pro, so I may do that. But that's a bonus as well regarding it, is the fact that you don't need to worry about the pen discharging, which can be a bit annoying if you're in full flow. This is the Slim pen which I'm using, which is the best pen for feel that I've found on the Surface Pros. And as you can see, the two pens are pretty similar. In actual fact, I do quite like the design because they're flat. They're not going to roll off if you put it on a table anywhere. And I just quite like the feel of it. They both weigh a similar amount. They have a single button on the side, which I can map quite comfortably to colour pick. So again, it's a very slight improvement because the battery, I mean, this Slim pen needs recharging anyway, but the battery in the pen on the older pens lasted a very long time anyway. So again, that wasn't much of a big deal. It's only a very small improvement. Okay, let's have a look at another minor improvement. Again, not a deal breaker, is the performance aspect. On Art Rage, I have decided, which is usually quite a good test, I've set the airbrush up and set it to a certain level of hardness. And the harder you have it, the more CPU intensive it's going to be. And so I've got two identical paintings loaded in. We'll just see what happens. Let's have a look firstly on, let's do Surface Pro first. So if we go in, let's set black up, and there we go. Let's just see what happens. So I've got it on 75% hardness at the moment. There we go. So it's going to be a little bit laggy, but that's absolutely fine. So if we now go over to the Flex over here, and we'll see what it's like. So it's a little bit faster, but again, it's not really, I would say, a deal breaker. And just to show you, I have both on maximum performance as well. So it is as true a test as I can get. If we just kind of, again, ooh, wrong pen. If we now just do this, so you can see, you have a bit of a gauge regarding that. Or if we now do this. So it is a bit faster, but from my artist perspective, I'm never going to do stuff like this anyway, so large. And just as a barometer, I'll just show you the canvas size. This would be a typical canvas size for me, which is, it's usually 3000 by 3000, but you can see that's about 4000 by 2.5. And I would never do that. I'd never use the airbrush regarding that. In fact, most of the time, what I'll be using is the oil brush, probably set to something large. So we can do a test with that as well. And this will be coming up to my major issue, the main reason for me moving from a Surface Pro, is the pen performance. All the other things are nice to have, they're little improvements, but with the Surface Pro I could live with all that. But for quite a while now I've been fighting with the pen. I've been really fighting with it to try and get it to work the way I want it to. The way that I feel that Wacom pens work, with a really good initial activation force, a nice smooth line, makes me feel as if I have control in what I'm actually doing. But I've never managed to get that on the Surface Pro. But now I have the Flex, which uses Wacom technology with its S Pen. I can now directly compare the performance between one and the other. So this is what I shall now show you. So what I think I'll do first is I will clear the layer, and I will put it on the oil brush because that's the thing that I use the most, and I'll set it to default settings, and let's put it to 100% in tool size. Let's see about that, and then let's do something similar on the Flex. You'll also notice that the menu sizes and all the text and everything like that is slightly larger on the Flex, and that's just because it's just an HD screen, where the Surface Pro is higher definition. And again, I've always been struggling a little bit. It's nice to have HD, but with Windows I've always struggled to get the scaling right on different apps, and it was just generally a bit of a pain and a bit fiddly to do. Anyway, let's go back to the oil brush on the Flex, and we shall select default settings, and we shall set that to 100%. And let's see what we have. The test I'm going to do now is going to be a very light test. It's typically the way I'm not one of these artists that presses hard on their devices. I like to just almost have the paint, in quotes, touch the canvas and to a nice light touch basically, and a nice initial activation force. And this is kind of why I liked this slim pen. So although it's using the same technology as the older pen, I suspect it's due to the nib, makes it feel as if it's got a better initial activation force, and I just prefer the feel of it generally. Okay, here we go. So we've got it set to black. We've got everything set up as 100. Let's just see what happens with just an initial. So I'm just lightly touching. It will break up a little bit, which is fine because I'm just lightly touching, so I'm not too bothered about that. But I can feel that the initial activation force is pretty good, which is why I like it. And I'm just doing it smoothly. A real light touch, just going along. And actually the diagonal lines, okay, I was doing it moderately quickly there, but the diagonal lines have vastly improved in the N-Trig technology on Surface Pro, so I don't really have too much of an issue with that. The issue I mainly have is just the way the pressure curve works, and it does on the Surface Pro, it seems to blow out a little bit more, and on certain devices, not the 2017 device, it has this weird staircasing issue with pressure, which is really annoying for an artist. So there's a possibility that may be okay, especially with the type of art that I do, which is very much more organic, very much more like natural media. With a paintbrush, sometimes the paint will come out a little bit thicker or a little bit thinner at times when you apply it. But it doesn't feel right when I'm using it. It really doesn't. So anyway, let's go over to the Flex and let's try something similar. Again, I'm not going to be applying too much pressure on it. There we go, virtually no pressure, and just kind of, nothing whatsoever. As much as I can, a very similar pressure if I can do. And as you can see, now I'm trying to do this as a true test. The actual pressure response from it is very much more even, and what I would naturally want to get. If you compare that to the kind of the bobbly lines of this, you can see where the difference actually lies. And this is only light single line pressure. Now, if I really start to push this, for example, if I really want to do something a bit more extravagant, for example, if I change the tool size to 300 and give that a go. So I'm going to apply a bit more pressure now, as the in the normal way that I would paint. And as you can see, now that is pretty horrible regarding the pressure curve response. That's not great. And now if we do it over here, if we go up and we set the size to 300, there we go, size 300, and now we do something similar. Let's see what we get with this. No, it's much better. It's a much better pressure response. It's much better. It's much more natural. You can see that's just all really kind of bobbly, and you don't have quite as much control, but that's just coming out really nicely. So that really is the main reason why I've decided to switch to the new Galaxy Book Flex. Now, the negative sides of the new pen and the way it all works, of course, is this will be Wacom technology. So as far as I'm aware, it's EMR technology, and therefore the palm rejection won't be quite as good as the N-Trig. And as far as I'm aware, that was the main reason that Microsoft chose the N-Trig technology for the palm rejection. And to be honest, with the Surface Pro, I have had no issue when I've been doing my art regarding palm rejection. I haven't had to use a glove or anything like that. And I have noticed on the Flex every now and again there is a dot that appears when the palm touches. But of course you can do things about that. You can either wear an artist glove, or sometimes, as I do, because I don't really use the actual touch when I'm doing art, I use like a keyboard or an external device to be able to set up everything. Then I just disable the touch screen for when I'm doing art, so that clears all that stuff up. So there we go. That is the main reason for me deciding to switch to a Flex, is based upon the pen performance. There's a whole load of other little small improvements, but the pen is the most important aspect for me, being a digital artist.